Section 4 is about understanding culture and communication. When we have different cultures that come together, there can be misunderstandings, and there's special skills that you need and sensitivity. You have to really understand the culture so there isn't miscommunication. So culture is defined as a complex system of values, traits, morals, and customs shared by a society. Because of globalization and growing diversity and social networking, we have to adjust and adopt new attitudes. And there are 5 dimensions that we're going to talk about of culture: context, individualism, time orientation, power distance, and communication style. So first, let's look at context. So you have high and low context. And context is the stimuli, environment, or ambiance surrounding an event. So for low context cultures, for example, the United States would be a low context culture. So these cultures depend little on the context, and we'll get into that on the next slide. Then you have high context cultures, and this is China, Japan, the Middle Eastern countries. They assume that the listener does not need much background information. Okay, so low context cultures, like us in the United States, we tend to prefer direct verbal interaction, and that makes sense. Direct conversation. Tend to understand meaning at only one socio-cultural level, are generally less proficient in reading nonverbal cues because we're so focused on that direct verbal interaction. We value individualism. We rely more on logic, and we say no directly. So if we say no, we're not going to say yes when we mean no. We're just going to come out and say no. Communicate in highly structured, detailed messages, and everything is taken literal. Give authority to written information. So if we have it in writing legally, we want it to be in writing. But high context cultures, they're different. So they tend to prefer indirect verbal interaction, tend to understand meaning embedded at many socio-cultural levels, value the group. So you're going to look at individualism like in the United States, but you're also going to see areas or cultures where the group is emphasized rather than the individual. Generally more proficient in reading nonverbal cues, rely more on context and feeling, talk around the point, avoid saying no. So these are exact opposites here. And so another point we're going to look at of our culture cues here: individualism. This is, like I said, the United States, North Americans refer to independence and freedom from control, whereas some countries are more collective, so they emphasize groups and teams. All right, and then we have time orientation. So we have monochronic time and polychronic time. Monochronic time is perceived as if it were running on a single linear track. So Western cultures tend to be monochronic and view time as a precious commodity. Okay, so like the United States, when you have an appointment, you expect the person to be on time. And if they're not on time, you feel like they're wasting your time. And this is not a good thing, and this looks bad on that person. That would be in the United States, but Polychronic time, which is like the Asian, South American, and Native Americans, they view time as abundant and non-linear. So they view time as an unlimited resource to be enjoyed. So it's more open and flexible. So you can see how cultural differences can cause miscommunications, especially if you don't understand or not familiar with that culture. Power distance measures how people in different societies cope with inequality. In other words, how they relate to more powerful individuals. So most Western cultures have low power, and most of your Asian countries have high power. So high power would mean they maintain formal hierarchies and embrace relatively authoritarian relationships. So it's very, you follow the person above you and you have no say. Whereas low power promotes feelings of equality. So, like in the United States, you can, in most situations, you can voice your opinion or take part in the decision making, more so as in a high power distance country or culture. Okay, communication style. People in low context cultures rely heavily on words in contracts and negotiations. So this would be North Americans. People in high context cultures, they're going to place more emphasis on the surrounding context than on the words describing a negotiation. So here, this is the same thing that we were discussing earlier. North Americans are uncomfortable with silence, impatient with delays. They value straightforwardness and are suspicious of evasiveness and distrust people that they perceive have a hidden agenda. So this is important to understand that the way we perceive things, these are how North Americans think about different situations. That's not how everyone is going to perceive that situation. Other countries may not perceive it like we do. So that's important, especially in business, to understand the culture, especially if you're having a business meeting with a different country. You have to understand the culture there. It also wanted to mention the Japanese may treat contracts as a statement of intention and assume that changes can be made. But in, Americans, once it's written down, especially if it's a contract, you have to follow the contract. And then Arab cultures may be insulted by the mere mention of a contract. A person's word is more binding. So you have to understand different cultures. Technology and social media, how has that affected intercultural communications? Well, social media can blur cultural gaps and empower people to change their circumstances. At the same time, it may deepen feelings of social isolation. So this is just one thing that we needed to mention about social media and how it does impact us. And then this last slide is just talking about how social media down here on the third bullet point, has kind of caused some turmoil. We have geopolitical turmoil, cyber attacks by foreign powers, and digital nationalism, which has restricted access to the internet. So we assume everyone has access to the internet, but that's not true. In authoritarian countries, those people are not, they have restricted use and they're restricted on what they can access on the internet. So these are just a few things that I wanted to discuss about understanding culture and communication. Let me know if you have any questions.